Fertility rates and a declining population. Now this is a massive problem when faced with the economic onslaught coming from countries such as China, Myanmar and Vietnam, where they're having a booming population, where they're having sways of young people who are eager and hungry and coming to the workforce and who will be challenging the established economic powerhouses like Japan and Singapore. And in light of that, ostensibly what the countries are trying to do is to encourage people to have more children. Now the question, and what we're happy to adopt here, is that in pushing that question, we're very happy to just focus on getting the more highly educated in society to have more children. And how are we going to do this? We're going to set up dating agencies that will go to universities during orientation camps and ensure and improve the opportunities for young, highly educated people to go out. This might not necessarily mean that we end up getting married, but it improves the possibilities and improves the likelihood of this happening. We're going to adopt messaging as well. We're going to say, if you're rich, if you're highly educated, then you should probably do your part for your country and have kids as well. This is massively effective. In Singapore in the 1970s, Lee Kuan Yew embarked on a stop at 2 message, and we are arguably still facing repercussions from that policy because people don't want to have more than 2 kids right now. They buy into the message once they see it everywhere and they imbibe it in. But beyond that, we're going to put in tax breaks. We're going to throw in money to try and encourage these people to have more kids. But, and this is an important part of my policy, we're going to help the poor people as well. We're going to improve and ensure they have literacy, that their children are able to catch up in terms of literacy, reading and writing, because we understand for poor people sometimes they fall in terms of literacy rates in comparison to peers of their age. We're also going to have things like public tuition schemes. The reason being that we want to improve the ability of these people to subsequently reach the university so they can access the same things and the same opportunities that we have. I'm going to talk about 2 things. Firstly, I'm going to talk about why this policy is necessary, and secondly, I'm going to talk about poor people, right? Why exactly this is, and how exactly they're not, and how exactly our policy affects them in this debate. First, why is it necessary? Rich people are not having enough kids for a multitude of reasons. One, they don't want kids to disrupt their climb up the corporate ladder, because in the ascension, in going up to top corporate positions, if they have kids, they have to take things like maternity or paternity leave that sees them up for a period of 3 to 9 months, depending on which country you are at. And in that same time frame, your peers and your colleagues are going to seize the opportunities that present themselves during that time to try and serve you in the corporate ladder. We think they recognize that and they try to avoid that situation by delaying having kids. Secondly, they also realize that it is something that they don't want at that point in time. What they want to do is that they want to climb the corporate ladder. They want to give them every opportunity at succeeding in life and giving them that shot, because they don't know the effect if they were to suddenly become and have a family. I'm not giving reasons why I haven't proposed. Those are the reasons why people don't do this. Right? But why is it important? Because we think that they know what it takes. The reason why we want highly educated people to have more children is because they know what it takes to reach universities, to be highly educated. They realize that if you're in South Korea or Singapore, you need to put your children through tuition so that they are able to catch up on things, or things like arithmetic or algebra, to be able to improve their chances and be able to compete with people in their same age group. They also know that they take better interest in their child's education. They go for parent support groups. They interact with teachers. They try and keep tabs on how their children are doing. And because they're highly educated, they are also able to oversee their children's homework and ensure that it's done well. And so you get that kind of constant care and attention that poor people might not necessarily have, because they firstly don't realize that that's something that is required for their children to succeed because they didn't go through it themselves. Secondly, they might not have enough time because they might be working multiple shifts. They might be working with their children at home. There are a multitude of reasons why rich people, this is a unique position that rich people can access, but not necessarily poor people. So when they have kids, we think that these kids are better equipped to face life, right? Because they are more highly educated, they get higher paying jobs. And why is this important? Because they can then support themselves. They can then be important economic units that we can then harness to try and compete against the booming populations in Vietnam, Myanmar. We're not competing in terms of magnitude anymore, that's impossible. But we want to harness their intelligence. We want to harness the value add that these people then provide. And that's the focus of our policy. Poor people. Why does this, how does this affect poor people? Let's understand one ineluctable reality. Poor people and poor families tend to have more kids. Firstly, because they realize that they don't have much in life, so they manifest their satisfaction and emotional gratification in having kids. They surround themselves with more kids. They realize that I might not have anything else, but I have my son, my daughter, and this is where I think I'm going to get the emotional gratification I might not get anywhere else. And why is this a problem, right? Why is this a problem that we need to address? Because when poor people have kids and they have more kids than the educated people and they can't support their kids because let's say they have 4 kids and they're just earning minimum wage, then the state has to step in. The state has to provide the assistance and the welfare that we think goes beyond just things like literacy classes or tuition. They have to give things like pocket money. They have to ensure that these people have access to education. Like they have to give things like, for example, welfare packs. They have to make constant visits to these people to ensure they're doing fine. And we think that we want to change that. Right? We understand that birth lottery is random, but we are more than happy to change its metric to try and push and ensure that the lottery falls in a way where more rich people, more educated people basically have more kids. Let's do the last point. At some point in this debate, they're going to say, sure.
You tell us why it's very difficult to incentivize rich people to have kids. Surely it seems that if you want poor people to incur less cost into the government, you would also make it costlier for them to have kids as well. Is that part of your policy?
No. So that goes on like the next part, right? How exactly, what about poor people? At some point, Brian, Jason, or someone there is going to go up there and say, but if you're a poor person, as a result of this policy, you're going to feel less. You're going to feel inferior. We don't think so. Our policy is to encourage people to have kids. That doesn't affect people from poorer families. That doesn't mean you are less. We're just saying that if you're highly educated, you should have more kids. That doesn't affect you as a poor kid. But more importantly, let's bite the bullet. We're more than happy with things that's fair in light of the kind of assistance that we are going to be providing these poor families. In light of the assistance and trying to ensure that their children have every shot in life to succeed. We think it's okay that they don't get the benefits that we're offering the rich people. We think we're taking care of them already. We think we're giving them every opportunity. We think we're being fair to them. And we're fine with our policy. And for these reasons, I'm extremely proud to propose.
I would like to thank the Prime Minister for that speech. And now I'd like to call upon the leader of the opposition to open the case for the opposition side.
Only a tiny minority of countries in the world experience underpopulation. The vast majority of countries in the world are suffering under the burden of exactly the opposite. And incentivizing even rich people in society is an immoral and practically stupid idea that states absolutely should not adopt. Firstly, I'm going to talk about is why this is an unjust interference with individuals' decision-making. Then I'm going to explain why this is a bizarre and harmful way to try and improve society and its education levels. And then I'm going to do a little bit more rebuttal. And then I'm going to explain why this burden falls disproportionately and unjustly on women, which is not something this opening government ever seemed to consider. Let's start firstly why this is an unjust interference with individuals' decision-making. We say firstly that we are principally against the state interfering in individuals' decisions to have children or not, because you are co-opting these individuals, even if it is socially beneficial, to achieve that social benefit, using them as a battering ram and removing them from the ability to make those decisions for themselves, and I think that is incredibly unjust. Because this is an incredibly personal decision whether you have children or not. Not only because you're likely to be, I don't know, inconveniently, emotionally tied to another fucking person for the rest of your life, but also because it has huge practical impacts on those people, in that they have to financially provide for that child. They likely have to carry that child for 9 months. Childbirth is pretty fucking painful, and you're forcing people more likely to go through that where they did not previously want to. The financial requirements of having those kids for future years, and also those emotional harms. This, in order for the opening government to get any of their benefits, has to change the decision that individuals otherwise make. So you have individuals who would previously choose not to have kids, and now, because of your policy of like tax breaks, are deciding to have kids now. That is an unjust manipulation of those people. But we would also say that it's unlikely that this makes this decision objectively good for those people. We're not the fucking opening government. That is unlikely to make the decision actually a good thing for those people to do, because getting a tax break doesn't actually outweigh all of the reasons you previously had for not wanting children, so this is not a full decision those people are making. Particularly when we're talking about relatively wealthy or educated people who are likely to have the financial means to have children previously. It's not as if this has removed the barrier to having the children they otherwise desperately wanted. This is just incentivizing them in quite a coercive way to have those kids, which is something they did not want otherwise. No. Next thing I'm going to say is I think it is immoral to incentivize having more kids at all, given the global crisis of overpopulation that the world is suffering at the moment. Because they tell us that countries like Japan and Singapore don't have enough children, but maybe that is true for individual states, but it is immoral for those countries to do a global harm of increasing the number of people using world resources, natural resources, and increasing the burden on the globe more generally, just for the selfish benefit of those particular states. It is immoral to increase the number of people on this planet because we are killing it, but it also makes it less likely that developing countries are able to get their fair share of the resources. The next thing to say here is obviously this increases the net number of children, because for the reasons the Prime Minister gives, they are not decreasing. That's a weird thing to tap. They're not decreasing the number of children that poorer people are having, and therefore we end up with more people on this planet. And I think there's quite a consensus that overpopulation is a problem, even if it is in self-interest of particular countries. Go.
So in your world, Japan, the governments of Japan and Singapore should not try and get people to have more kids, all people to have more kids, to combat the declining fertility rate.
Good summary of the point I just made. Congratulations. The next thing I'm going to point out is that this is a bizarre and harmful way to improve the education of society. The benefit that this opening government seems to be claiming is that we're going to get more kids of rich people and they will somehow produce a social benefit. That is a very roundabout way of increasing the skills and education level of society. We would prefer that you just directly educate your population, because that is both more just and more likely to sincerely achieve the benefits they seem to want to achieve. Because relying on more educated parents to somehow by correlation produce more educated children may occur slightly, but also not all educated parents, for the reason they give, are likely to help their kids' education a lot, because they're likely to spend a lot of time at work, that sort of thing. And therefore it is very uncertain that this benefit the opening government relies on is ever going to accrue. We would prefer the alternative of just the state actively fulfilling the burden of educating its people, rather than shifting that burden onto particularly educated parents by doing things like increasing funding to education programs, things like providing incentives to send your kids to school. Let's talk about what the opening government says here on mutual exclusivity. They say their model extends to poor people too, they're also going to educate them. That is clearly not exclusive to their side. Anything they would do to benefit poor people, we would also do. But we would also contend that we have more ability to do that and are able to do that more extensively, because we are not burning the political capital and actual capital that your model expends on things like tax breaks, and therefore we're likely to increase the level of education we provide to those people. But secondly, we're not sending a confusing and contradictory message that we would only prefer the children of rich parents to be the ones that get educated, and therefore we're more likely to achieve those benefits. Why is it better to directly improve the education of your populace? Firstly, it is principally more just, because it does not mean that your likelihood of achieving opportunities in the world and achieving an education are dependent on who your parents are. But secondly, it's just a better mechanism for getting a skilled society, because you're not arbitrarily limiting the pool of people which you are training up to be skilled and to take those jobs that the government said were so desperately vacant. If you are having a more broad education system, that is obviously better in improving the pool of people whose skills you can take advantage of. The next thing they say here is that poor people are having too many kids. Firstly, that seems like an argument for sex ed and contraception, not this bizarre motion. But secondly, they give absolutely no mechanism by which they're going to decrease the number of children that poor people have. That is something they weirdly concede in the Prime Minister's speech, and therefore they do not achieve any benefit here. We also would say, though, that if their problem is a burden on the government of things like welfare services, the children of rich parents also increase that burden, because the government in most states still subsidises the education of even the richest children, and they are likely to use things like the education system, like general infrastructure, like general social services, and therefore that burden is a problem, whether you increase overpopulation by poor or wealthier children. The last thing I want to talk about is why this burden is likely to disproportionately and unjustly fall on women, which is something this Prime Minister apparently just did not give a shit about. Because when you talk about the fact that people do not want to have kids because it is impeding their progress on the corporate ladder, or the fact that they have to take time off work, my question is who feels that sting more intensely? And it is clearly the women who are unable to regain that career at the point at which they take the time off to have children. That is firstly because they are the people that physically have to carry that child and therefore take maternity leave, but also they're more likely to be socialised or pressured into being the caregiver of that child and therefore more likely to have to take time off to care for it. Obviously, this opening government concedes they want more women to go through that, because that is their apparent mechanism for benefit. That is evil, because you are weaponizing women for the benefit of your state more broadly, even if we concede those social benefits in a way that impedes their progress in the corporate ladder, impedes the progress of their career, and coerces them, even if you provide a benefit to their family more broadly, an individual harm to that woman who is no longer able to achieve that economic freedom and economic empowerment that she so desperately wants. This opening government takes people that previously, with quite full information and quite a good position in society, rationally decided not to have children, and forces them to have those children. There are good reasons they decided not to do it for themselves, and it is immoral to force those people, particularly those women, to go through that experience they otherwise did not want.
I would like to thank the leader of the opposition for that speech, and I would like to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister. Here, here.
我只是确一下角度。
It is not coercion to tell individuals who are educated that you have benefited from the social structures that the state has provided you, that the state is facing a crisis in terms of resource allocation, in terms of being able to compete with rising states, with younger, hungrier population, and therefore you can do your duty to help your country as well. That is hardly coercion. By that logic, any attempt by the state to inculcate any message in society is coercion as well. Even their policy of imposing sex education on the poor, which they claim to stand by as well. The notion that just because we think something, a state of affairs, is more desirable and the other is coercion is frankly absurd. First rebuttal, this question of will this policy work? Of course it's not going to be 100% effective because we're not forcing people to have kids and it's their style. But like they say, the psychology of the privilege is precisely because there are personal reasons as well as economic reasons why they don't want to have kids. We have to target both of this to move the needle in any way possible. And it has worked in places like Scandinavia, in places like Sweden and Norway, where direct provision of aid to mothers to take through things like care packages, even to the rich, has been very effective in moving the needle in terms of the birth rate from say 1.5 to 2.1 right now, thereby ensuring that the population can eventually be replaced. Next, this rather bizarre point that many countries in the world suffer from overpopulation and therefore this policy is wrong. Like firstly, a lot of states that actually are economically developed all suffer from these problems. Japan, Korea, even China right now. This is not a small portion of the world unless you think China does not exist. But second, even in countries which are overpopulated, there is a burden to support the overwhelming number of poor. And in such circumstances, we posit that more tax-paying, educated citizens in the long run is one way to ensure that you have more tax money to support the poor as well. So even in a rather bizarre context in which they try to force this debate into, this policy is still arguably necessary. Let's move on to their principal objection to this policy, that the state should not step in to tell individuals what they should do with their bodies, which is weird because they advocate the very same thing when they say that we should teach the poor sex education as well. But we say that the state can step in for the very simple reason that the state is right now facing economic crisis in a lot of these countries as well. When you have to provide welfare disproportionately to the poor because they have more kids, the state steps in. When you have to compete with countries like China and Brazil and the educated populations there, the state has to step in as well. But more than that, when we're talking specifically about the educated, like I said in the introduction, they have benefited disproportionately from the structures created by the state, whether you are a man or woman, and therefore, when the state is facing an economic problem, both internally and externally, the state has a right to at least tell these individuals that doing this is good for your country. But thirdly, it is just wrong to say that childbirth is terrible and in a perfect world, most people don't want it. The truth is most people in the world may want it, but there are other factors weighing out whether or not they actually want to do this, like emotional factors, like economic factors, and the state is easing those other burdens as well. So it is just wrong to say that messaging per se is wrong. But moving on to the more direct particular argument they have, that direct education and direct education of the poor is better. Like firstly, of course the state is going to help the poor, of course the state is going to help everybody get education. But the state is not your parent. The state doesn't spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with a child. The state cannot inculcate norms through you that only a parent can through direct contact with you your entire life. The state cannot tell you that you need to go to school. You need to sleep early in order to, unlike most people in this room, to ensure that you get a good education as well. Those norms are the preserve of the parents, but you disagree.
Your examples of states with declining birth rates are some of the wealthiest in the world. How do you justify them selfishly and marginally increasing their wealth at the cost of the poorest states which suffer due to
Those
global
states are the
overpopulation?
wealthiest in the world, but they're also the most debt-ridden in the world precisely because of the declining populations in this country as well. Japan has a massive, more than 100% debt rate in that country, and we cannot escape the ineluctable economic reality. But more than that, we say direct education is simply not enough. By that logic, the only way they can try to help everybody in the way that they want to supplant this policy is that the state becomes even more interfering, even more directly interfering into the lives of individuals as well. So in both worlds, there will be a degree of interference. What we prefer is for parents to organically inculcate the necessary norms into their kids to make them educated as well. More on that in my substantive. But next, how this hurts women. Like there's an argument for pro-women policies when it comes to having kids. Like we are not, it is unavoidable if we can make childbirth a non-gender thing, we could. But we can't. Right? What we can do is provide things like the greater maternity and paternity leave as well. We could inculcate the fact that the responsibility here doesn't just fall on the mother, it falls on the father as well. Better childcare policies to ensure that the father is involved as well. Those two messages are not mutually exclusive. So having engaged in that case, let's move on to what I want to talk about, which is that we want to send specific normative messages about education. To put it simply, we live in a world where expertise is increasingly divided, and that is a problem. So we acknowledge here that this policy sends a normative message that it is good that a child is born into an educated family rather than an uneducated family. We're happy to bite that bullet because of what Iman told you, that the birth lottery is utterly random. Your desire to have kids if you are uneducated arguably harms the chances of success of the kids that you bring into this world. So to the extent that you want to be responsible for bringing a kid into this world, you better create the best possible environment you possibly can for them. Now it's here that we acknowledge that lack of education is often structural as well. So there are structural reasons why certain people are uneducated. But at the same time, the immiseration of poverty and the lack of education also creates certain pathologies as well. That is why in certain inner cities, there's this idea that reading constitutes acting white, even though that's utter bullshit. That's why someone like Khan and his quote said that because of his upbringing, when he got angry, his first response is still violence. Those are the norms that education is meant to win away. And we say those are the only things, those are things that the state can never inculcate into kids because they're the sole preserve and the sole domain of parents as well. So we think that to the extent that you want to bring kids into the world, we would rather move the needle to ensure that more kids are born into that segment of the population that can move away from these norms and ensure the best for these kids as well. Because education is a good thing. A lack of education is not an identity that you should be proud of. It is something you should try to get out of by getting educated as well, even if you are an adult. So for all these reasons, because this policy is necessary, because these individuals have a duty to do so, and only parents can fulfill this fundamental, pivotal role we're exceedingly proud to propose.
I would like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech, and to close the top half, I would like to welcome the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Once did we hear from opening government, how are they engaging with opening opposition's case in a sense that we think that this is an irresponsible policy, regardless of which part of the world you come from, but it is especially damaging when you're coming from overpopulated states that are also developing states. The motion does not say that we would highly incentivize intelligent individuals, specifically in Japan and Singapore and all the like nice states. It just says that you ought to engage with all of the contexts, one of which open government refuses to do. In my speech, I'm going to talk about two things. Number one, why we think that this is not necessary, and number two, why this just isn't principally justified, which I don't think, again, open government actually engaged with that speech. First question, is this necessary? They told us that this is necessary because smart people produce smart children. I think there was little to no explanation why this would increase smart kids but also then decrease less smart individuals. Because in reality, assuming the best case scenario of open government's world is that, sure, smart kids increase in number, but the number of less smart children remain the same because the calculation of less smart individuals is still the same in a sense that they still want to gain solace and all the reasonings that Imran gave you in his speech that people find comfort in the idea that their children is a symbol of pride in a world where the capitalistic structure is failing you. Those calculations still exist, especially when you point blank outrightly answer the POI that came from closing opposition. Would you then implement policies that would disincentivize poorer individuals to have children? The answer was a point blank no. All you do then is increase the number of children overall, which overburdens the state. State having to be strained on trying to care for all children, things like public education, public health care, especially when I think there was a lack of characterization in assuming that more smart individuals are the most privileged of individuals. This means that it's very likely that a lot of the highly intelligent individuals still come from the middle class groups of people, which means that they're still very much dependent on public health care, on public education, which means that it's going to be, like, overall as a number, a lot harder for them to access the education because they just increase the number overall and the state being straight. And if it's true that you care about poor children, and I think that your policy ends up robbing them off of the opportunity even more, because they have less of like a capital within society to be able to lobby and say that we want changes. What was their response? No, thank you. Their logic was more smart children means that more smart people, when they grow up, go to university, makes the state more productive, and as a result, more critical mass, and you lobby for change because we get more money, also more importantly, to tax individuals. So we get out of debt. Hold on, what was Imran's policy? We will give them tax breaks. How is our solution? We will tax them and have more money. Like, how does that even work, right? If your incentive was public education, awareness, and we would give them tax breaks, but our solution is, hey, we have more people in order for us to tax them. These are the same people that you incentivize to want to get like better education, and then later on say that you will actually give them tax breaks. I don't necessarily think that your logic makes sense. No, thank you. Smart people, and I also think the calculation that you would have more smart individuals as a result, caring for less smart individuals or making the state more productive overall, guys, shut up. I think that there's a huge gap in terms of establishing smart individuals necessarily mean that you are more empathetic or more caring of society overall. In fact, out of personal experience, I will tell you that some of the smartest people are some of the most insidious of individuals. You have not established the link between empathy and being more intelligent. As a result, I don't think that you're going to be okay with the state using, presuming that states, that you get to tax them, you get to have all these policies. That is dependent on the political will of these smart individuals in wanting to make those changes in order to solve all the problems that you've established. So, in a world where you can't establish that, it means that in a world where they are, like every other people on earth, more self-interested, more caring about groups that are more proximate to them, they may not necessarily want to lobby towards the states in order to make all of the changes that you want, and they only care about the groups that they actually come from. And especially given the fact that upper middle class and people from the upper class are much more capable in capacity and having more capital to lobby for the state. All of the changes that they end up lobbying for still comes at the expense of those poor individuals. And notice that they never give you a reason why these poor individuals would necessarily have less children because their calculations are still the same. So I think a lot of the premise for opening opposition's case doesn't make sense, especially when they're not engaging with developing states. Yes.
Do you believe that the government in overpopulated countries should discourage childbirth? Or do you agree that overpopulation is radically less important than the maximization of personal autonomy?
Thank you. We think, which actually goes nicely into my second question. Alright, is this principally justified? We don't think so. Because I think while some states are overpopulated, underpopulated, all the circumstances that states have, having children is a very personal decision. This is something that Steph established to you in her speech. Because it's not as if we're starting off from a society whereby there's a lack of narrative or lack of support structure for people to have children, right? There's a lot of expectations that if you're a married couple, that this is the next step you ought to take. That if you're a woman, don't you feel like your life is less fulfilled because you don't have children? The fact that children are seen as a symbol of pride towards family members, it means that in status quo there's a lot of attachment between you as an individual with you ought to have children, right? So I don't think in status quo we're starting off from a position whereby intelligent individuals don't have a support structure or some form of awareness in order to have children. It means that at least we're starting off in a status quo whereby there's like a marginal increase in terms of the sentiments of people to want to have children. In your world, you make them want to have children a lot more, but the problem with that is that everything that I just explained to you, which is like a lot of the more intelligent individuals end up wanting to have more and more children, whereas the less intelligent individuals don't necessarily decrease in their incentives. As a result, you increase overpopulation. The reason why this is principally unjustified, as opposed to like maternity leave and all other benefits that we give individuals in status quo of their children, is because that's a question of what should we do with your pre-existing children? Should we leave them and not give them any opportunities in order to survive in society? Or should we give you some support structures? Obviously, it's about correcting damages that have already been done, which is why we're okay with giving support structures. But your world is not about helping pre-existing children. It's about changing the decision-making process prior to having those children. That's why we're not okay, because in overpopulated states, this is a huge problem. In underpopulated states, you don't necessarily get all of the benefits that you want, because that's highly contingent on the political will of individuals, something which I don't think open opposition has ever established in this debate. For all those reasons, practical.
I would like to thank you, that's the leader of the opposition, for that speech, and now I would like to welcome the member of government. Here.
There's been an implicit consensus in the opening part that wealthy people face a certain number of external influences that lead them to have fewer children. We think that's been misunderstood and undercharacterized. We think the state is negligently allowing coercive capitalism to deny full reproductive autonomy to people who are wealthy. We think those external forces amount to coercion, and we think the state has a duty to rectify them. That will be our extension. First, two extraneous pieces of rebuttal. We hear from opening opposition that there is an unjust interference with individual choice. Obviously that presumes people are a blank slate, but of course they are in fact encumbered by a range of prejudices that are given to them by society because they are embedded in that society. The final thing that they tell us that won't be addressed by our attention is that women bear the disproportionate burden. An easy way for us to implement this model would be to incentivize men to participate in childbearing, for example, make any tax breaks that are given to them conditional on their taking paid parental leave and so on. That's relatively easy to deal with. Alright, why do we think that the impacts on wealthy people at the moment are effectively a deterrent? First, because they face more demands on their time. This is going deeper than opening government, because we tell you first that there is an income that you would forego amounts to a coercive pressure if people come out of the workforce. But second of all, that your labour is seen as essential by your employers, so you are pressured to minimise the time that you take off. Second of all, you are socially conditioned from the time you are in high school to prioritise your career aspirations, because domestic aspirations are seen as lower class or unbecoming of you, or not living up to the family name. Third, because you were deceived into believing the choice will be available later and later down the track. Technology is always improving, women are having children later and later. It's a choice you can always put off. That plays into a short-term bias that, again, is counter to people's full, rational, autonomous decision-making. The final thing here is I'll point out we even get opening opposition that career pressures engender self-doubt about your capacity to be a good parent. That itself is a coercive pressure on people that denies them the full choice they might actually take. Why do we think that choice to have children is a special one that deserves protection? First, because it is it has its origins in your own biology. That is, many people already, even if they are socially conditioned to have higher-minded and more professional aspirations, they have an internal urge, if you like, an impulse that says a fuller life would be lived if you had children. There's a sense if you do not that you cannot fulfill your life goal or experience all that life has to offer. And that's not something that you get from society. That is something which humans remain born. Even in the year 2018, this impulse has not evolved out of humanity. But second of all, we would say that the external influences I pointed to before, I'll take you in a second, are pro-social impulses that you cannot weigh against other priorities. So all of those other things that are occurring, those other impulses, those other factors that are occurring upon you, are ones that seem to you to be part of your duty towards others, which makes you put them above yourself.
You point to hugely significant social, biological, and financial factors that are currently coercive. So how large exactly is your tax break to change all that coercive forces?
Very, very large. It's a very important problem. We're committed. It's a big one. So third of all, this pertains to future human individuals, which means there is a deep sense of obligation to do for them what your parents did for you. You are, in a sense, not living up to your parents' example. In a sense, you are turning your back on them and saying that you were not a sufficiently good parent that I would feel the need to be a parent like you and emulate the way you chose to live your life. It's seen as a judgment against your parents. All of that is to say that we think many people would live a happier life and would, in a world with fewer capitalistic coercive pressures on them, would choose to have children. And they would be happy if they did so because that would reflect their true preferences. But we are in a different world and we're not achieving that.
People being coerced out of having kids is not an argument for coercing them into it unless it is a benefit to them. You don't change the capitalistic forces which punish people for having kids. How then do you justify subjecting more people to them?
So it is not the case that if there is a large amount of coercion happening now, and we have a subsidy that in our best estimation is countering that we are coercing people. Because if they opt out our policy, they are merely foregoing things that are not as useful to them as what they're really truly getting. We have just tried to level the playing field, which is to say we are countering coercion. We'll get some really good actuaries to try to measure those coercive impacts and come out with an effective tax policy. Alright. The second area I want to address in this debate is on human happiness, because we keep moving opposition about overpopulation. Here's why we think that problem is overstated. First, because global education levels and external perception are both rising. Second, because migration from rural to urban areas around the world is reducing the imperative of many families to have many kids. And third, because innovations in efficient land use, sustainable agriculture, and more supply chains that can get food to different parts of countries quicker, all are reducing the strain on land, which also deals with opening opposition's point about poor children having worse childhoods, because that is gradually solving itself as living standards improve and we are less strain on the planet. The second thing I'll point out here is that the mitigation strategies to those harms themselves often have harmful externalities. So first of all, if you have more migration, you have more brain drain in countries from which people emigrate. Second of all, there are backlash effects in those refugees countries, which is especially true in ethnically homogenous countries like Japan and Vietnam, which, by the way, we think American government has every right to define the debate to. And third, the states can control the education levels of those people who go there. So we increase human happiness on every score in that context, because net utility is actually just a measure of the welfare experienced by most people in the world. And if we compare a world with fewer people all having a moderate level of happiness to a world to which we just add more people who have a greater level of happiness, that is a world with more net utility. Why is it that we get that? First of all, because people raised by these educated parents will be one where their children are more likely to have access to a good education. Second of all, where they're raised with high expectations that they set for themselves, and also that will be more broadly conceived, including if they wish to be parents themselves. And third, greater access to healthcare. All of which is to say that having your basic needs addressed reduces the amount of stress you experience in your childhood, which is the main correlate with learning difficulties and acting out and propensity to break the law and all those things that can make your life harder. So these children will have an especially good lifetime. The last thing I'll say is why it would be immoral to incentivize the less educated to have children, to just, I guess, preemptive. They face coercive pressures to have children because they are less informed and more skeptical of perception and because they face greater pressures from domestic work, but as we say, those trends are gradually declining. But also we think there is less capacity on their part to raise large families because they are, by being less educated, you're more likely to be poor, and that means you're more vulnerable to financial shocks, which are especially the case if your children fall ill or the price of groceries suddenly increases, all of which is to say this would be a bad impact on them because it would increase their social mobility. That is why we think we should target the wealthy. We are doing them a service by counteracting the coercive forces of capitalism that they experience, and it would increase human happiness. For those reasons, we propose.
Being a member of government, would I speak to now like to welcome the member of the opposition.
Thank you, Pat. The problem with opening government and closing government's rising tides raise all boats case is that they don't understand that society is zero-sum. That is to say, for every single university entrance that a rich person gets, that means that there's one less poor person who is able to access that. That means that even if your society gets better off and more wealthy overall, if the massive demographic shifts towards the rich means that you no longer vote for redistributive policies or vote for Black Lives Matter, those benefits don't matter. We ultimately think that the most vulnerable people are the ones who have been historically wronged, therefore we have a principled obligation to them, but furthermore that the marginal utility for those who are most disprivileged is much more than the rich person who gets to buy a yacht now instead of just a nice house. So, 4 layers of analysis for our extension, then I'm going to rebut everything we got from the government side. In terms of extension, broadly I'm going to talk about why this entrenches privilege both on a racial and wealth level, which is fundamentally damaging and the most important thing. Layer 1. I want to establish that education and opportunity is zero-sum. So they try and tell you that we have an alternative of simply making sure that we fund other people like the disprivileged to ensure they have opportunities. This doesn't work. The reason why is because education has winners and losers. Admittances are limited, and because of poor demographic information and poor time lapses, this doesn't scale perfectly. For their large prestigious institutions, they think we like to limit their admission rates because they want to seem prestigious. What this means is that those who are more wealthy get all the advantages that they describe on their side of the house, and that they're able to access these institutions. Even worse, as open opposition points out, there's an opportunity cost. But I think this opportunity cost is not just in terms of educational opportunities, no thank you, but also in terms of subsidies and bursaries to even enter universities in the very first place. So they talk about capability, but now we're talking about the ability to enter once you've proven your worth. No thank you. It's a statistical fact that Ivy League schools will accept 75% less students who ask for financial aid on their application. And that's precisely because they don't think that they can donate heavily after the fact. It's precisely because they don't think they can necessarily afford the whole education. They don't want to spend that money. So no, thank you. This locks out other people into getting to these bastions of power, which means that the disprivilege that they want to talk about quantitatively, no thank you, are less represented in the workforce, less represented in universities. Second layer, why social mingling decreases. I think a significant factor as to why society is becoming more progressive is because we interact with people from different backgrounds, that we understand that they're just like us, that we work in the same educational institutions and the same workplaces, where it indicates that we have common goals and that they aren't so different because they have kids and aspirations just like ours. No, thank you. What does this policy do? It deters people from marrying those with lower education, because specifically you get less of a tax break if you're marrying someone who is down from you. Second of all, it means that you're meeting other people, thank you, in Oxford because you're encouraged to date on Oxford campuses rather than going to that waitress at the bar and saying, hey, do you want to go on a date? Those are valuable things which are necessary to break down, thank you, the social cohesion and uniformity which leads to massive totalitarianization of viewpoints and locks out, no thank you, the diversity which is necessary to change the privileged minds. Third player, no thank you. This means that you can't fund education for these most disprivileged groups. Open opposition is correct in identifying that there's an opportunity cost in this debate. But open government then says, look, there are some things that you can't change with money. There are things such as norms, no thank you, and parents teaching their children in a specific way which you can't influence on your side. I have 2 responses to this, no thank you. First, there are deficiencies in the status quo that actually dictate this. It's notable to understand that in lower income neighborhoods, teachers matter quite a lot. Good teachers actually perform the same role as teachers do in many of these communities and incentivize them to go to school, do their homework, etc. So I don't think it's correct for them to say that these norms are the exclusive domain of those who are wealthy parents. It also happens through, no thank you, good funding for teachers and strong mentorship programs which are necessary to inculcate these beliefs. So this is just a false argument. No thank you. The second thing to note is even if we think it's less net utile in terms of funding those who are more disprivileged, we think that on balance would be an obligation to them, even if we get less bang for our buck, if we're increasing their livelihood, even if not by as much as those who are most wealthy, that is more important than information. No thank you. Final extension, why this is very, very important. Okay? This changes demographics. The reason why Texas has become a democratic state and why Dallas is now a democratic city is because those who are uneducated and disprivileged Hispanics, Latinos, and African Americans are now a larger voting bloc than before. This is because, no thank you, privilege coincides with race and other factors. Being highly educated, no thank you, largely comes from the fact that you have educational advantages from the very beginning. That you didn't have historical histories of plunder, no thank you, where the white colonial slave masters took your income and took your labor without any recompense. They don't have to fight against stereotypes, no thank you, such as being a super predator simply because you're African American. The problem with their policy then, no thank you, is that they directly incentivize those who are racial majorities to continue having children and decreasing the amount of proportion that those who are disprivileged have in these states. Sure.
Why are you saying that being African American or Latino is synonymous with being uneducated?
I'm not. I'm saying that statistical trends show that historical oppression means that we have put these people into a relegated position of less privilege and less ability to access education. That is a nonsensical straw man. I think we need to be a little bit intellectually more generous if you actually want to try and beat us in this round. Don't straw man, that's a dick move. So, we think that this leads to demographic shifts. Why is demographic shifts important on our side? Because obviously in 18 years when these people become actual adults, they become a voting power which changes the direction so that they talk about Black Lives Matter and stopping things of racial oppression which opening opposition unfortunately didn't talk about. No, thank you. But more importantly, even in the now this changes. Parties need to brand themselves so that in 18 years they're known as that party. So people like Hillary Clinton, no thank you, right now are called out for calling black people super predators in the past. When you know that demographic shift is going to occur, that means that you're less likely to vote in negative ways right now, less likely to say antagonistic things right now, which leads to racism and which leads to bad policy. The scope of this argument is large. It's happened in Israel, where Palestinians who are having more children can influence elections. It happens in Lebanon, where the demographic shifts matter. We think in terms of weighing this debate, those who are most disprivileged matter the most, as I explained at the top. Open opposition explains why the wealthiest have the most lobbying power, but we explain why voting changes mean that those who are both poor and of ethnic minorities can no longer combat that lobbying power through voting distributions. Rebuttal. Their claim is coercion on closing government. Okay, so open opposition already talked about coercion. And I think the interesting thing is open government says coercion doesn't really matter. They say it doesn't matter because if we can get beneficial outcomes and we have a principled obligation to these people, then that coercion doesn't matter, which is our case. We want to protect those who are most disprivileged, and therefore their coercion certainly shouldn't matter. Second of all, what is the view of a world without coercion? Is it one in which we're in a national state with no government and all freedom? Because everything is coercive. The fact that I like trying to do certain things is coercive. So the question is, what draws that critical threshold for what's so coercive that we have to oppose it? And I think open opposition gives you a much better line than closing government. Finally, the principle of recompense. We can tax the rich and we can help them disprivilege on our side. We're very proud to oppose this.
I would like to thank the member of the opposition for that speech, and to conclude the government side, I would like to invite the government whip. Here.
I'll ask two questions in this speech. Firstly, which team is able to guarantee choice to people in this debate? And secondly, which team is able to guarantee overall happiness in this debate? On choice, opening opposition claims primarily that the immorality of this is derived because women and their partners make a free choice at the moment, and so to create any sort of incentive for them in particular to have a child would be immoral because it deprives them of that free choice. Opening government in this debate is correct in identifying that there are some factors, for instance relating to income, that mean that people would not want to make a choice. Opening opposition then also rightly characterises that those incentives could be interpreted as rational and reflective of their free choice. We show, in fact, that capitalism and employers have systematically abused cognitive biases to create a choice that is outside the interests of these people and not reflective of their actual desires. And we give you 5 devastating reasons, none of which get responded to in any detail, except, mind you, the response was just like, oh, your opening believed that you should do this one thing, whereas you guys have a different priority. Yeah, it's called an extension, bro. Just because one extension was also, we should improve education, partially derivative of your opening, tells us exactly nothing about how we should do this debate. What reasons do we give? We tell you, firstly, that the demands on these people are felt as, firstly, financial coercion that they can't effectively weigh into the long term, but secondly, conceptualized as a duty to their workplace. No response. Secondly, they're shamed for domesticity because very often people are told that if they have children and deprioritize their career, that's an indication of weakness. No response. Thirdly, we tell you that it buys into forms of short-term bias that does not allow people to make effective long-term decisions because you can always put it off another year and not have that painful conversation with your employer. No response. Fourthly, we tell you that people's careers, when they're told they're good at their jobs, they're told that they must be bad at other things, particularly given their boss is often trying to discourage them from having a child, which creates those norms. No response. And finally, we tell you that all of these norms are pro-social. That is to say, you feel like you're helping other people, you're helping your employer, you're helping your co-workers, and in doing that, you feel like you're doing the right thing by not having a child. Again, no response. Opening government does pair wide in here correctly by being like, you don't fix those problems exactly, so what is the point of this? The first thing to say is that it is binary whether or not you are making a choice in a coerced fashion. That is to say, by counteracting many of the norms that we identify in this debate, we are able to move people closer to the place in which they would make a decision that accurately reflects their desires, which is the moral framework that opening opposition wants to buy into. But the second response is that this policy, as established by opening government, directly combats almost everything that we describe in this debate. That is to say, it relieves the financial pressure that people would feel if they left their job for a period by giving them tax breaks. it relieves them of the social conditioning that tells them they should not be like that by using messaging effects. And so in doing so, we are radically able to fix the degree of coercion that these people are likely to feel against them. So closing opposition's first response to this is like, oh, well, you have a different priority to your opening. I've already mocked that by response. The worst response, however, is just the idea that we do not perfectly aggregate the way in which people are likely to make a choice in this debate. Government policy can never be constructed around people making perfect choices. We are imperfect beings in an imperfect world. Given, I think realistically, no team is going to get there. The question is just who gets closer to the moral priority that this side wants to talk about in opening. At the conclusion of that issue, it should be clear that we are at least defeating the opening opposition, because their priority very explicitly is we should maximise choice. And in fact, I ask you a point of information, would you coerce people if there was a serious problem with overpopulation? And they agree that you would not do that, which implies that they believe that pragmatic social concerns like overpopulation or social inequality are radically less important than the moral good of maximising choice. So let's then get to that question, which team in this debate is able to improve that choice? So let's begin by talking about closing opposition's extension. The first thing that I would note is that your opening's moral position is explicitly that your extension is less important than our extension, so you're already a bit in trouble. The second thing that I will say, let's look at it. The first thing that we hear is that education is zero-sum. This is a lame repackaging of STES material about how education is zero-sum because you burn political and economic capital. So realistically, it's not obvious why they think they're being productive in this debate. But the second thing to say is that it is not true that these things are mutually exclusive. When people are productive in an economy, they generate more capital than they cost. That is in fact what profit is, right? You pay someone a wage because their labour is worth more than the wage that you're paying them. Which means if you generate the revenues, you can build another Ivy League school if you want to, guys. It doesn't need to be zero-sum. If you create a society oriented around that kind of success, you get there more. I'll take opening.
If status quo has the coercion of capitalism, why is your policy selectively implemented onto the rich? Especially if your point is to increase happiness. Don't you think poor people deserve happiness?
Daniel explained that the opposite was true for poor people. That poor people are socialised into having children too much for a variety of reasons. Like for instance, they are told that it is a thing they would be relatively good at. They are told that their careers are worth relatively less, and a variety of other factors that, to be honest, I didn't take notes on because I thought that bit wouldn't be contentious because it was so obviously bulldozed in Dan's speech. You can check your notes on it if you want. Obviously, there are different levels of coercion based on class in this debate. Secondly, to closing opposition, they tell you that this deters social mingling, and the reason is that you would have your tax bill increased. The first thing to say is that their characterisation is creepy. It's like you hit on a service worker and then marry them. They depend on you for tips. Like, I don't love that, guys. But the second thing to say is that there's already an explicit social cost. If you marry someone poorer than you need to give them half of your stuff, alright? So if your tax bill is a bit less, then that does not matter. Like what? Like obviously there is still a financial cost there. It is unclear how the marginality of that increase by the tax bill is something you're really going to care about. I don't know. I just never thought of my girlfriend's wealth realistically. Although she's pretty rich, so maybe I'm not. This changes demographics, and this is the most immoral part of their case. They're like, we should increase the number of people who are very poor in society so that we are able to guarantee that we get progressive election outcomes. In the first instance, I think that is pretty gross. In the second instance, I think there is a reasonable correlation between, so maybe the demographics don't work in our favour, but the thing is that obviously poor white people do not vote in a favourable that is favourable to progressives. Rich, educated white people do, which means the demographic shift you see might be problematic, the impacts of policy are there. But the third thing to say is that people of colour who become wealthy in contexts in which they're a racial minority are the worst affected by our norms because they are the people who feel least secure in their wealth because they don't have histories and backgrounds of it, and they have not received normalisation from their parents. Like when you're wealthy, you still have an obligation to have kids, which means that our benefits accrue massively asymmetrically to people of colour who have become wealthy, which means actually what we do is lock in a new generation of black billionaires. Opening opposition responds to this idea of education. I've already rebutted that, and they talk about how this disproportionately affects women. We explain it would be very easy to construct this policy in a way that is favourable to them. We give you a bunch of reasons that it is really good to have kids. It makes you happier, it makes the kids happier, and of course we fix the overwhelming moral problem of coercion. We take the round.
I would like to thank the government whip for that speech, and to conclude this quarterfinal, I would like to invite the opposition whip. Here,
think Government is quite funny, but I think he misunderstands what this debate really is about. I'm going to clarify that for you in two big areas. First, I'm going to talk about the wealth gap. Second, I'm going to talk about political change. First, on the wealth gap. What I want to do now is to explain the strategy coming out from closing opposition, how we outweigh the extension coming out from closing government. Which is why I don't really care that they give us 5 reasons as to why there is existing coercion. Because so long as we demonstrate that we reduce a greater coercion that exists, we outweigh any of those explanations. Opening opposition tells us that currently women are coerced unfairly by the policy coming from government. I think that's possibly true. Closing government comes up and tells us that there are existing capitalist coercive forces. Our argument coming up from closing opposition is simple. Capitalist coercive forces, as closing government pointed out, are correct and do exist. But they hurt the poor disproportionately the most. What we are demonstrating in closing opposition, that worsening the wealth gap therefore worsens the coercion of poverty. No, this coercion already is implicit coming up from opening government. We admit that the poor currently have disproportionately more children because they experience some kind of emotional coercion to have children. I.e., coercion for having children exists across the board, whether or not you are rich or whether or not you are poor. There is a wash in this debate. Maybe the coercion is different, but coercion still exists. The question is, what other kinds of coercion exist in society? We suggest that poverty is this other kind of coercion that we're trying to prove on our side, which is why we outweigh that even if we concede the extension coming out from closing government. So, how do we go about proving this? No, because closing government spent so much time mocking us about not rebutting the 5 reasons, they actually did not refute any of the mechanisms we do bring to the table about how government worsens coercion due to poverty. The first mechanism we bring to the table is that the poor are locked out of education. No, this directly clashes with opening government's claim that we can wean away bad norms from education. If we prove that a class is systemically locked out, then you don't get the benefits accruing from your side as well. Closing government admits that a tax break is going to be huge. What is this tax break likely to be spent on when you can save a significant amount of money for your child to come? This tax break is likely to be spent on saving up for their college education, providing them tuition to be able to get into these top schools. This means on a meritocratic basis, these individuals who are highly educated at the start are more likely to be able to get into the schools in future as well. The problem is amplified when we realize that meritocracy is not the means by which most Ivy League schools or even any other school around the world, university, actually assess the way in which they take in application. Because a lot of these schools disproportionately favor people who don't ask for financial assistance because most of them are profit generated or profit driven anyway, rather than those who do. What they do in government is make the middle class more likely to be able to afford education without financial assistance, thereby locking out the whole slew of poor individuals who cannot go for this option. We think this is paradigm. The only response coming up from closing government to this point, thank you both of you, is that we can build more schools. I will explain why this requires political will and how they don't get the political will in my second issue, and I'll point it out for you. But suffice it to say now, given that I don't think we can build significantly more schools to counteract the large swings of middle class individuals who are educated and will now benefit from their scheme, we think they still significantly lock out a large demographic of the poor. End point of this claim. It means that the poor are increasingly coerced, not getting benefits on their side, but are locked out of the systems of change that they believe the poor deserve. No thank you. The second reason we give is that this creates an empathy gap. Always right to point out that OG does not prove greater empathy on the part of the rich. But we go a step further. We talk about how social mingling is an important part in bridging the empathy gap. The only response coming from government is that I never thought of my girlfriends well. I think that's a good thing. I think that's probably right. The trouble now is that you make people think about it. Because the only people you are forced to date or are disproportionately likely to date is people who come from the same wealth group as you because you're all dating within university rather than anywhere else around your society. No thank you. Trivially, there is more empathy when you can talk to more people, even if your intention isn't ultimately to get married to them. I don't think that refutes the point at all. We generate more empathy, we think that's great in terms of holding power in the future, and thank you both of you, we think that ultimately the converse of that on their side is that they don't create the empathy gap or they worsen it and therefore worsen the coercion from poverty. At the end point of these 2 points, I just want to demonstrate that closing opposition has proven that there will be at least a slightly greater wealth gap, and that is the coercion that we should care most about. I don't hear a clear response coming from their side. Maybe opening wants to do.
When has anyone ever made a decision to marry on the basis of whether or not they're going to get a tax break?
Yes, correct. So that is the point, right? If you want to disproportionately create that kind of dating services on your side, what it means is that now becomes a sole consideration. Whether or not this person is proximate to your university, are more likely to be able to date them, whereas anyone else outside of university, you are less likely to date. If not, your policy doesn't work, then you might as well not have the dating services on your side. If you want to concede that your policy works, you must admit that you are dating within your social circle. No thank you. I want to do actually this rebuttal now against the large looming economic crises they claim coming out from opening government and implicitly in closing government from Myanmar and China. No, The implicit concession coming out of opening government is that the only way countries like Singapore and Japan, which are far smaller than China, are ever going to be able to deal with this economic crisis is to improve qualitatively rather than quantitatively. It is impossible for Singapore ever to outnumber the Chinese labour force. This means the relevant solution is not to increase the number of smart people, but to disproportionately tax the rich more to increase productivity. It is a problem solution mismatch to use more smart people because you're never going to be able to outnumber them quantitatively. All you can do is to make sure every one of the most number of people in your society are intelligent, we do that on our side, when we can just tax them more using the same political capital you have on yours. This also conveniently demonstrates that we reduce the wealth gap because we can tax the rich proportionally more using that same political capital, thereby reducing the coercion we win on our side. Second question, political change. All was right to demonstrate that the rich are lobbying power and may not vote to help the poor. However, our claim coming from closing opposition is that lobbying power can also be counteracted by demographics, and we demonstrate a systemic demographic change that closing government does not refute. Why is this the case? We significantly increase the voting bloc of the rich and poor government. Now, this simply works trivially if we assume their policy is effective. If we assume that they are effectively going to increase the overpopulation, and the only change in incentive is for the rich, this trivially means that the rich will now have a larger voting bloc. Why is this bad? Because it means it reverses the current trend of upliftment allowed by a large voting bloc of undereducated individuals. Importantly, it doesn't matter whether there is an intersectionality to buy this point, because that means that significantly more rich people are going to vote for policies that tax them less, which means that there is less redistribution, and that hurts the poor. We think that's already an outcome that is bad enough. But we demonstrate an intersectionality as well. How historical oppression means that the poor are less, or certain racial groups are less likely to access education. That means they are also more likely to be underrepresented in this new voting demographic that is created on their side to create more regressive policies on yours. The only response we heard coming up from Gov Wit is that rich white people vote progressively. This is just factually untrue. In the recent elections, white individuals of every education level voted disproportionately for Trump. I think the best people to represent these groups are going to be those groups themselves. So we want to uplift the racial group and ensure we don't create that change in demographics on their side. At the end of the day, we demonstrate effective political change by mitigating the demographic shift. We demonstrate why poverty is the greatest coercive force, and we bridge that opposing opposition. For all these reasons, we take it.